Hey everyone, Diavolo here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going over the final and most intense arc from throughout the entirety of Demon Slayer. This arc started off with a literal explosion of action, and from that point onwards, it really felt like it could go either way, as time slowly started to tick down closer to the final sunrise. This arc here is of course nothing else but the one and only sunrise countdown arc of the jaw-droopingly stunning Demon Slayer series. But just before we continue, make sure you hit that subscribe button and leave a like on the video, as it really goes to show that you are loving these Demon Slayer and just entire series explain videos in general. But anyway, enough of that, let's get into part 2 of the final arc of Kimetsu no Yaiba. Tanjiro regains consciousness and sees the night sky above him, finally back at the surface after Yushiro had worked so hard to get them all there. Realizing that they were in the middle of a city, Tanjiro panics and Karaya Ubuyashiki sweats while saying that they were flung much further than he had expected. He asks his sister how long until dawn, and she tells him that there is still an hour and a half before daybreak. Karaya's eyes widen at the knowledge that there's still so much longer left. A crow tells the Demon Slayers how much longer they have left until dawn, and taking note of the fact, Tanjiro looks around to confirm that his comrades are doing alright. Relieved that the Hashira who had been with him are all safe, Tanjiro moves out to find Muzan. Suddenly, the Demon Lord bursts through a pile of rubble, sending it flying in all directions. Enraged, Muzan taunts the Demon Slayers and dares them to keep him there until dawn if they can even do so. He launches a wave of attacks that the Hashira all evade and then begin to attack Muzan. Obanai with the serpent-breathing third form Coil Choke, and Mitsuri with her love-breathing second form Love Pangs. Giyu then attacks with the water-breathing 8th form Waterfall Basin. Obanai manages to slice through Muzan's neck, but is surprised to see that his blade goes through the demon and is unable to leave any damage. He realizes that he is regenerating the instant they damage him. At once, Muzan resumes his attacks on all the Hashira. However, he is pushed back by the junior Demon Slayers who wish to give their lives to take out Muzan. All of them begin attacking him together and quickly make an opening for those who are able to fend off Muzan, giving them a chance to survive. The Hashira are horrified at the chaotic battle scene and their subordinates being killed one by one to protect them. Tanjiro struggles for air, unable to keep fighting due to the pain of his words. Muzan explains that those who die immediately from his attacks are fortunate, for even a wound would be fatal. Those who die from them will suffer a greater pain. He nods towards Tanjiro as the boy lies on the ground, writhing in pain with a tumor growing out the entire right half of his face. Saying that he mixes his blood into all of his attacks, Muzan tells Tanjiro that he won't become a demon since the concentration of his blood in his attacks is too high. He would be poisoned instead, destroying Tanjiro's cells and ending him. Tanjiro continues to writhe in pain, grabbing his throat as Muzan confidently declares that the boy is dead. Sakonji shakes with fear as Nezuko wakes him up for the second time. As soon as she opens her eyes, he asks her what's wrong. Outside, Tengen Uzui and Shinjuro look on in shock as Nezuko somehow begins to run away. Uzui yells after her, asking where she's going, while his colleague Shinjuro reports to Karaya Ubuyashiki that the girl had begun to run away. Karaya was afraid that Muzan might be influencing her, but he felt his father's hand on his shoulder. The voice reassured Karaya that it would be okay, and all he needed to do now was let Nezuko make her own decisions. Karaya ordered them not to follow her, to their initial consternation, as if she were caught by a demon, they would be able to retrieve her. However, he tells them with tears in his eyes that his father had told him it would be alright. Nezuko is faster than Sakonji, and he loses her just as she leaps off a cliff after being pointed in the direction by her father's ghostly appearance. As she lands safely, Sakonji is shocked to see that Tamayo's medicine to make her human again had not worked. Elsewhere, Giyu, Obanai and Mitsuri continue to battle Muzan, who had manifested his malevolent presence over Tanjiro's face. The tumor can be seen growing just above his eye. They are all struck by this, but Muzan unleashes another flurry of attacks and commends them for still being able to move. However, those with Demon Slayer marks would not fall so easily. Mitsuri's wound flares as she is unable to move, yelling at her companions to protect themselves. Muzan's outstretched whip is suddenly cleaved off by Gyomei to Mitsuri's relief. The Stone Hashira apologizes for being late as Muzan recognizes him as the demon who slew Kokushibo. He is suddenly taken aback as he is sliced clean down the middle from behind by Sanemi, who also flings a few bottles of oil towards the demon, who slashes them and gets drenched in the liquid. Sanemi backflips away and lights a match midair, throwing it towards Muzan, setting the demon on fire. Muzan cries out that Tsunemi played a dirty trick, to which the Hashira responded that it's the perfect fit for the demon, saying he will grind him to smithereens. Murata peeks out from the rubble at the scene and Giyu notices him, yelling at him to carry Tanjiro to safety as the boy is unable to move. Touched that Giyu remembers his name, Murata carries Tanjiro forward as the boy begins to dream. While envisioning the past, Tanjiro is back at home with an axe in hand chopping firewood, but he is shocked that he cannot smell anything. Tanjiro notices he is in a home that looks similar to his own and not actually his own. Confused at the fate that has befallen him, he comes across a nearby man who is bowing respectfully before him. He realizes this must be the swordsman of the first breath, Yoriichi Tsukikuni. Meanwhile, Murata is doing all he can to resuscitate Tanjiro's physical body. He was unable to find a pulse and the heart had stopped beating. Back at the home, Yoriichi reveals that he came to speak about what was on his mind and he wanted someone to listen. Tanjiro wonders if it involves the 13th form. He says it's been 2 years since they last met and he's glad that Yoriichi is doing alright. Tanjiro was surprised to see this, but he also noted that Sumire had grown up since they last met. He realizes that his actions and words are those of his ancestor Sumiyoshi, meaning he cannot interact with them. Yoriichi states though that he is happy to see him happy, saying he is happy when he sees other people happy, and believing it to be a blessing to be born in this world. His mother was a very religious woman who often prayed for peace in the world. She would pray to the sun god to shine on his ears, back when he was considered deaf. He worried her when he couldn't speak as a child, something that only got worse with his age. His brother, Michikatsu, was a kind boy who always worried for him despite garnering abuse from his father for it, even gifting him with a handmade flute. The day his mother died, Yoriichi ran from the house, knowing that he was unwanted, and he was to become a priest of the temple, as well as ensuring Michikatsu would be the rightful heir. He ran as far as he could, seeing the beautiful night sky, but despite running for almost an entire day, his feet never became tired. Soon after, Yoriichi came across a young girl, around his age, standing alone in a paddy. When asked about what she was doing, she sadly states that her entire family had died of a plague, leaving her the only survivor. She wanted to take some tadpoles home for company, but she remained unmoving for the rest of the day. And as the sun began to set, she decided to release them, unwilling to separate the tadpoles from their families. Yoriichi offered to take her home with him, and as she looked at his face, he saw that her eyes were dark, like obsidian. The girl's name was Uta, and she began living with Yoriichi. She was talkative, capable of speaking for almost an entire day, while he was quiet. But Uta taught him how different he was to normal people. She stated she had never met another person who could see inside a living creature like Yoriichi can. This enlightenment led him to realize why he always felt like an outsider. But Uta cared for Yoriichi greatly. He considered himself like a kite with a cut string. She grabbed it and held on tight. 10 years later, Yoriichi and Yuta had married, and Yuta was pregnant, expecting her first child soon. Yoriichi went to get a midwife to prepare for the birth while hoping to return before sunset. While out, he encounters an old man attempting to cross the mountain despite being in poor shape. The man's son was wounded in battle, and Yoriichi took the man to see him for his final moments. Deciding to fetch the midwife the next day, he ran home as quickly as he could, but the sun had already set. Yoriichi found Uta had been killed by a demon along with the child inside her belly. As a shocked Tanjiro listens, Yoriichi comments that even if something is more precious than your own life, others can easily trample over it. He spent 10 days absent-mindedly cradling the corpses of his family until a demon slayer chasing the demon had found him. He told him that he believed the two should receive proper burials. All he ever wanted to do was live with his family in a small house. He wanted to have the futons close together, at a distance, where he could see their faces or easily reach out and grab their hands. It would have been enough for him, but that dream would never happen, he sadly says. Demons exist in this beautiful world. Yoriichi became a demon slayer shortly after this, learning people had been chasing demons for a long time, yet nobody had used breaths like him, so he taught them how they worked. The best swordsmen were known as the Hashira, and now armed with the new breaths of flame, water, wind, and stone, their powers increased even further. They began killing demons like never before. Yoriichi also adding his own brother had also joined upon the deaths of his subordinates. Soon after, Yoriichi came face to face with the originator of demons, Muzan Kibutsuji, and he finally understood upon meeting him that he knew he had been born for only one purpose of defeating that man. After crossing paths with Muzan, Yoriichi immediately senses his violent intent, comparing it to magma erupting from a volcano. Muzan instigates the confrontation by stating his disinterest in swordsmen that use breathing techniques. Shortly after, he unleashes his attack and attempts to kill him. Though Yoriichi dodges the attack, he knew that even if a single strike hit him, it would be fatal. By seeing through Muzan's transparent body, Yoriichi was able to discern that he had a total of 7 hearts and 5 brains. Despite his immense power, Yoriichi manages to complete his sword forms and combine them into a single attack, overwhelming Muzan completely. As Tanjiro, through Sumiyoshi, listens to the story, he realizes Yoriichi had created the 13th and final form of sun breathing. Despite trying to regenerate his body, Muzan becomes stunned and is forced to hold his head in place to keep it from falling off. Yoriichi realizes that the immense amount of damage was caused by the bright red blade that he wielded. He questions Muzan on what he believed the value of life to be, only receiving a furious glare in response. Believing his words didn't reach him, Yoriichi's attention is then drawn to the young demon girl traveling with Muzan. He immediately notices her eyes staring directly at Muzan, not with a look of concern, but with a look of hope as he sat there, dismembered, holding his severed head. Before he began dealing with her, Yoriichi approaches Muzan in order to finish him off. However, as he walks towards him, the sound of teeth grinding grew louder until Muzan's body burst into many small pieces. Caught off guard, Yoriichi was only able to cut about 1,500 of the 1,800 total bits of flesh, leaving the remaining portions to regenerate somewhere else and escape. The girl collapses on the floor and begins to weep while tearing out her hair and angrily cursing that Muzan should have died. She is then surprised that she managed to survive despite saying Muzan's name out loud. Yoriichi approaches her and calms her down before she eagerly informs him about Muzan, how he was the originator of demons and would most likely never appear before Yoriichi again. He asks for her compliance in defeating Muzan, to which she agrees and allows her to escape. She introduces herself as Tamayo to Yoriichi, something that Tanjiro is surprised at. After his interactions with the demons, Yoriichi is approached by the demon slayers, whom inform him that his brother, Michikatsu, had become a demon. Once they return to the estate, he is angrily confronted by the rest of the swordsmen for failing to kill Muzan, for letting Tamayo escape, and for Michikatsu's transformation into a demon. As a result, he was banished from the Demon Slayer Corps and was demanded to commit seppuku, but the newly assigned Oyakasa would not allow it to happen. After telling Sumiyoshi the end of his story, Yoriichi reveals his thoughts of being born with a gift to defeat Muzan, but his failure to do so, and that because of his mistake, many more people would begin to perish at the hands of Muzan, telling him it pains him. Distraught by his inability to comfort his friend for going through so much, Sumiyoshi sits beside Yoriichi in silence until Sumire slowly walks towards the swordsman. She tugs softly on his clothes and says hug. Surprised by the child's sudden demand, Sumiyoshi asks if his guest would mind carrying her to make her happy. Without a response, Yoriichi picks up the girl and lifts her up into the air. The little girl squeals with the delight of happiness, causing Yoriichi to emotionally break down and his eyes fill with tears. Soon after, Suyuko returns from gathering chestnuts in the forest and discovers Yoriichi weeping as he hugs the little girl. Suyako comes forth to comfort Yoriichi, saying she'll treat him to a warm meal. Back in reality, as Tanjiro sleeps, he wishes that Yoriichi's heart would find any form of peace after hearing everything that the man had to go through. After a series of attacks from Muzan, Gyome comments on how he appears to be getting faster, so fast that Mitsuri barely manages to dodge his attacks on pure intuition and luck. Before Mitsuri can land an attack, she realizes that she is getting dragged down by one of Muzan's arms. Another attack from him manages to slice off some of the Hashira's right cheek and injure the shoulder of her right arm. Obanai jumps to rescue her, and with the help of Sanemi, Giyu, and Gyome holding Muzan back, he is able to carry her to another demon slayer. He commands the slayer to find Yushiro to treat her injuries, and the slayer agrees. However, Mitsuri insists on fighting, but Obanai doesn't allow her. As he leaves her, she pleads for him not to die. As he's running, Obanai contemplates the number of people that have had to die, all because of the existence of demons. At first, he wishes that he and Mitsuri had met under normal circumstances, but takes it back, saying that he would rather die and cleanse himself of the filthy bloodline he carries within him. His bandages fall behind him as he's running to reveal the slits across his cheek. In a flashback, it is revealed that his family stole and lived a luxurious life from it. Obanai was the first male born into the clan in over 370 years and was confined to a cell because of this. He would have died earlier if it wasn't for his different coloured eyes, as the demon living there with the lower body of a serpent decided that he should grow to a more satisfying size before she'd eat him. She was also the one who ordered the other females of the clan to cut the sides of his mouth to resemble her. As Obanai was trying to get away, Kaburamaru, his snake friend, had strayed inside the cell before their escape. Using a hairpin, Obanai slowly cut away at the wooden cage, and they were able to slip out soon after. Because of him, the serpent demon killed everyone else in the clan, and tried to kill Obanai, but Shinjuro, the flame Hashira of the time, cut her head off, saving Obanai and his female cousin. By becoming a demon slayer, he felt as though he could become a better person, even though the souls of the dead family members always dragged him down. Obanai restates that he would like to die by killing Muzan to purify his blood and hopes to meet Mitsuri again in another life, one without demons, saying that if he and her are ever reincarnated into humans, he'll confess his love to her. Nezuko continues to run towards the location of the fight as the group of Kikuchi attempt to keep the site of the battle clear of civilians and redirect all approaching people to safety. They tell them that they are a rescue team sent by the local policemen. Another group of Kikuchi examine the rubble of the buildings destroyed by Muzan's attacks and find that no one has been harmed due to the damage, except for a cat trapped in the rubble. After freeing the cat, it ran off to the battlefield with a bag strapped to its back. This cat was no one other than Tamayo's. Over at the fight, Obanai and Sanemi battled Muzan at close quarters, and Obanai chopped off one of Muzan's arms, cleverly kicking it away as he severed it to prevent the demon from regenerating immediately. Muzan notes the strategy as well, but is unconcerned, saying that the extra time the Demon Slayer has brought is but a blink. Muzan attacks Obanai with his whip, and the Hashira rues all the energy he is having to waste just to avoid the mouth of the whip. He assuredly thinks that he will only allow himself to faint 1 second after dawn, as every second is precious and has been bought with the lives of all of the members of the Demon Slayer Corps. Giyu begins to weaken as a result of the venom he has received from all of Muzan's attacks, and his sword is whipped away from him by one of Muzan's attacks. Obanai and Gyome intervene, slicing the creature, with Sanemi grabbing his sword and throwing it near the water Hashira and yelling at him to focus, or else he will kill him himself. Giyu gratefully grabs the sword and performs the water-breathing third form flowing dance, resolving not to back down and keep fighting until the very end. Muzan admits that they are more resilient than he had expected, but is unconcerned as it is only a matter of time before his venom kills them all, long before dawn. The Hashira continue to struggle against Muzan as the poison continues to weaken them, until suddenly Tamayo's cat jumps onto the scene and ejects its cargo, vials of antidote to Muzan's poison. It manages to file all the vials at the Hashira, and they immediately begin to inject the antidote into them. As this happens, Muzan slices the cat into pieces. Sanemi smiles as he notices his tumors disappear, and Gyome also notices his frenzied pulse, and constant pain vanishes. The Hashira are able to fight with more ease again, which Sanemi is thankful for. Gyome notes that it is possibly just a temporary cure for the symptoms, but that they are fortunate for such an event to actually happen. Muzan quickly deduces what had happened and realizes Tamayo had done it, cursing her for being a thorn in his side, even in death. With immense fury, he launches a frenzied attack that creates multiple craters in the landscape ahead of him. The Hashira all barely manage to dodge the attack, with Obanai wistfully thinking to himself how his contribution has been the lowest, wishing he could land more crucial blows. Thinking that when one's life is in danger, one is able to exert explosive strength. He reflects back on how before he had never lifted anything heavier than a pair of chopsticks, and his biggest task was escaping a prison cell. He couldn't believe it himself when he had successfully done so, and thought of what Michiro did in his final part against Kokushibo by changing the colour of his sword. According to the crows, all he would have been able to do was grip his sword tightly, saying he had been shocked when he heard about it, and at first believed it had changed colour due to a rise in temperature. However, now he realised that to obtain a bright red blade, he would have to grip his sword with all his might and grit his teeth. He put all his strength into gripping his sword, and it slowly began to shift from its usual colour to a bright red. Obanai reflects on how he saw stars in his peripheral vision when he saw the bright red blade and realized he had made a mistake. Recognizing that he had been too fixated on tightening his grip on his sword and gaining the bright red blade to the point he had almost passed out due to lack of oxygen. He is brought back to Earth with a yell from Tsunemi, who warns him to watch out as Muzan launches an attack his way, noting that even if one of them falls, it will increase the burden on the others. Obanai tries to stand up and fight, willing himself to make up for Mitsuri's absence. However, he has lost feeling in all parts of his body except for his sword hand. Giyu attempts to intercept Muzan's attacks, but he isn't able to outpace the demon's blow. Suddenly, he looks up and sees Obanai in the air, having somehow successfully dodged the attack. Muzan sees this and attempts to attack him in midair, but is shocked to see the Serpent Hashira dodge easily again. Further surprised at his right arm and whips being cut off seemingly from nowhere, Muzan notices that there is an odd kind of cut that could not have been made by the weapons of those that he is fighting. Muzan forcibly regrows his severed limbs with a delay, then resumes his attack to stop Gyomei and Tsunemi from getting in too close. He is further surprised as his left arm is chopped off as a result of a similarly mysterious cut. Muzan deduces that it has to be from a blade with jagged edges, and realizes that someone else is present who is also aiming to destroy him. Quickly assessing the new threat, Muzan analyzes his surroundings, saying that even if a spell from Tamayo's demon could make someone invisible, it could not erase their traces of existence. Though he is unable to see any silhouettes through the dust clouds, Muzan is still able to hear the air parting in some areas, deducing that there are 3 hidden attackers around him. He slices at their approximate locations and is able to land a hit on all 3 of them. Inosuke, Kano, and Zenitsu suddenly pop into view as Muzan's attacks slice off the seals on their heads. They are taken aback at how quickly he was able to find them out, but Gyomei is pleasantly surprised to see that they are all still alive. Inosuke boasts that he won't die and that he has plenty of seals to spare. Muzan unceremoniously interrupts Inosuke's monologue and swipes at him with a whip, but his attention is drawn back to himself mid-attack as Obanai slices off both of his arms. He is displeased at the time it takes to regrow from these attacks by a bright red blade, and Tsunemi is heartened as he notes this fact to his companions. Kano and Zenitsu hurriedly put on new seals and attack Muzan with flower-breathing fourth form Crimson Hanagomoro and thunder-breathing first form Thunderclap and Flash. Enraged, Muzan calls them a bunch of pesky flies, saying that they have nothing but pitiful tricks. But he is interrupted by Obanai, who attacks him with serpent-breathing third form Coil Choke. While this happens, Gyomei thinks to himself that this addition to their numbers and Obanai manifesting a bright red blade has helped them, and it also allows him to concentrate more. The Stone Hashira clangs his weapons together, and upon impact, both of them change colour to a bright red. He swings at Muzan and knocks off his entire left shoulder, exposing his spine. The demon pauses and Tsunemi yells Giyu to prepare himself as he swings his blade at Giyu's, turning both of their weapons bright red as well. A crow arrives overhead and announces that dawn will break in 1 hour and 3 minutes. With this, Tsunemi declares that there is no problem as they will chop Muzan into pieces. Yushiro injects Tanjiro multiple times with the antidote to Muzan's poison, made by Tamayo in an attempt to rejuvenate him. The demon slayers around him ask if injecting Tanjiro so many times is safe for him. He quietens them and says that his condition has been worsening since Muzan struck him. The demon slayers try to free Tanjiro's katana from his hands, but he has a very tight grip on it, so they fail. Yushiro takes this as a sign that Tanjiro still has the will to fight, and suddenly the demon slayer holding Tanjiro's head yells out, saying that he had felt his pulse return. They attempt to wake him up, and when one of them mentions that Muzan might get away, they are all left completely stunned as Tanjiro's katana begins to creak as his grip on it tightens considerably and he jolts back awake. Back at the fight with Muzan, a Kikuchi, hidden out of sight, peers over to see how things are faring, and gets hope that they might hold out until dawn. Gyomei cleaves off the left half of Muzan's torso, and Tsunemi rushes over to a pile of seals on the ground and puts one on his forehead. As soon as he put it on, he could see Kanoa, Zenitsu, and Inosuke, as Inosuke declared that he wanted a bright red blade like the Hashira. Tsunemi launches the wind-breathing 7th form Gale Sudden Gust towards Muzan. Gyomei is relieved at the arrival of the new fighters as that allows him to concentrate more, looking into the transparent world. He sees that Muzan has multiple hearts and brains, and thus will not die if they chop his head off. He also notes that they move around his entire body, making it difficult to actually strike them. An idea suddenly strikes him. believing that if the others could also see Muzan in the transparent world, they will be able to strike the organ simultaneously and destroy Muzan for good. He calls out to the others to look closely at Muzan's body and see if their vision changes, and if they can see through him. For an instant, Obanai is able to do so and is shocked at the sight. He doesn't have long to ponder this idea, however, as Muzan launches a devastating attack in all directions and crushes everything around him, flinging everyone into their surroundings. The Kikuchi is shocked at the sound and looks over again to see what had happened, and is dumbfounded as he sees Muzan standing on his own and the surrounding area having sustained heavy damage. Looking right next to him, he is even more baffled as he sees Gyomei knocked into the building he is hiding behind and that he had lost his leg. His horror only grows as he sees Sanemi has been flung into the upper story of a tall building, while Obanai, Zenitsu and Inosuke are all unconscious in the rubble, and Giyu's sword arm has been severed. Kano's sword falls to pieces as her seal falls off and she falls to her knees, with Muzan right in front of her. She tries to urge herself to stand up and attack him, but she can only stare transfixed at him in fear and shock. The Kikuchi rushes from his hiding place to attack, but Tanjiro interrupts Muzan's attack with the Hinokami Kagura, Beneficent Radiance, cutting off Muzan's arm. The remaining stump of flesh sizzles. Muzan looks at it in concern, as it does not grow back immediately, while Tanjiro apologizes to Kanoa for being late. Handing her off to the Kikuchi, he turns to face Muzan, as he says that the boy looks positively awful, and taunts him by saying that in his current condition, it is difficult to tell who the demon is between the two of them. As he gazes at the boy, Muzan is reminded of Yoriichi and says that he makes his skin crawl, and Tanjiro challenges Muzan, saying that they should finish it all. Tanjiro thought about how his understanding drastically changed after seeing the proper forms of the Hinokami Kagura with his own eyes. He noticed wasted movements and the variation of the angle of his wrists, differences in footwork and the intervals between breaths. He said that Yoriichi was a quiet and simple person, and when Suyaku asked him to show her the different forms, he obliged. Sumiyoshi made sure to memorize all of them, searing them into his memory, left breathless by the beauty of the movements. When he finished demonstrating, Suyaku and the children were overflowing with excitement, and Yoriichi bowed his head in embarrassment. Sumiyoshi asked Yoriichi to come back someday, but when they parted, the Demon Slayer gave his Hanafuda earrings to Sumiyoshi, who realized that this meant he would never see his friend again. This brought tears to his eyes, and he yelled out to Yoriichi as he left that they were grateful for him, for saving their lives, and they would continue on his legacy. Shouting that Yoriichi's life was not without value and that he shouldn't feel as if he hadn't accomplished anything, Sumiyoshi said he would pass down the sun breathing and the earrings to his future generations. Hearing all of this, Yoriichi turns around and thanks Sumiyoshi with a beaming smile. In the present, Tanjiro stands in front of Muzan and thanks Yoriichi for his actions, including sparing Tamayo, whose own works had aided the Demon Slayers in fighting the demon, and for showing his sun breathing, with which Tanjiro could assuredly defeat Muzan. He thinks to himself at how he had pondered over what the 13th form could be, and how he had noticed the 1st and 12th form had similar names, recalling that his father had told him that if he learned to breathe properly, then he would be able to dance forever. Saying that his suspicions had been confirmed when he saw Muzan's current state, that performing all 12 forms sequentially would complete a ring that would result in the 13th form, Tanjiro plans to attack Muzan by connecting all forms together and continue to strike his brain and heart until dawn. Realizing the gravity of his task, Tanjiro understands how someone such as the Flame Hashira who spoke with Yoriichi about his fight with Muzan could lose confidence, believing that he doesn't have Yoriichi or even his own father's skill, and unsure on how he would prevent Muzan from escaping as he did against Yoriichi. He asks how he can do something even the great sun breather couldn't do. Steeling himself, Tanjiro resolves to try his best, rallying himself to keep his heart burning. He charges at Muzan, who begins to rapidly attack him as he uses the sun breathing. Seeing Tanjiro's attacks remind Muzan of Yoriichi, and he cries out that he is a ghost. He slashes around so violently that the ground around them cracks into pieces, and he lands a hit on Tanjiro, who is pushed back. Meanwhile, Tanjiro notices how Muzan had been able to defeat everyone else. He had 9 whips growing out from his back in addition to his own 2 arms, and he also had 8 even faster whips that grew out of his thighs. Realizing that since the demon could change shape, he needs to stop thinking of Muzan as having a fixed form to avoid being taken by surprise. Tanjiro attempts to combine all the forms to perform the 13th form by using the sun-breathing, dance and raging sun, but is thwarted midway during the fire wheel and pushed back yet again. Unfazed, Tanjiro says that he will connect all their forms as that's how they were designed to be, and resolves to succeed. Muzan notes that living creatures are able to tap into reserves of strengths that they are not aware of to escape death, and looks on to see Tanjiro doing the same in an attempt to connect all 12 forms of the sun breathing. He sees that Tanjiro has turned his blade bright red just as the other Hashira had, but is unconcerned as he says that the Demon Slayer's attacks are nowhere near as powerful as those of Yoriichi's. As the young Demon Slayer connects the sun breathing, dragon sun, halo head dance, and fire wheel, he successfully manages to connect 6 of the forms. However, Muzan's organs keep moving within his body, preventing him from attacking his torso. Beginning to feel fatigued, Tanjiro heaves and slows down, but he keeps telling himself to focus on 1 second at a time while connects the sun-breathing fake rainbow and burning bone summer. Muzan notices that Tanjiro's attacks begin to lose their accuracy and surmises that he will soon lose his red blade as well, saying that he is yet another swordsman who will never live up to Yoriichi, nor reproduce the terrifying technique that the old swordsman had used against him. Launching another attack towards Tanjiro, Muzan manages to connect and knock the boy back. Tanjiro coughs up blood and Muzan whips at him yet again, barely managing to evade it. Swiftly regaining his footing, Tanjiro resumes his task of connecting together all forms of the sun breathing. This puzzles Muzan as he wonders why he is struggling so much against one weak and wounded human being who is growing weaker by the second. Deducing that he himself is also going slower as a one-on-one fight wouldn't have lasted so long, Muzan suspects it is an after effect of the antidote injected into him by Tamayo. Resolving to ask her himself as he had absorbed her cells, Muzan seeks out her remaining presence in his subconsciousness. Finding the remnants of the demon within him as a severed head, Muzan holds it in his palm and asks her what she had done as he believed the drug had only made demons human again. Tamayo's head reaffirms this, but she smiles evilly and says that she won't tell him what else it does, as that would be something his multiple brains should figure out. Enraged, Muzan crushes the remnants of Tamayo's head within his hands and tries an alternative method to figure out what had been done to him by reading the memories lying in her remaining cells. Muzan dives through her memories and finds one of her in a lab with Yushiro and Shinobu. Recognizing Shinobu as the poison user who had fought Doma, Muzan watches as she suggests that they mix in 2 poisons instead of 1, under the assumption that he could withstand one of them, with the first poison being the antidote to turn demons into humans and the second one being an aging potion Tamayo had concocted to make its victims older by 50 years every minute. Suddenly realizing that he had been struggling against the Hashira and Tanjiro because his body had been diverting strength to combat against his aging, Muzan attempts to calculate how much he had aged, noting that it had been almost 5 hours since Tamayo had injected him with the drug and the aging potion had only begun to take effect 3 hours ago. Muzan is shocked as he realizes that he has aged by at least 9,000 years over the whole battle. Recognizing that he should have noticed this earlier when his color did not return to his hair, Muzan jerks his head to the side as he hears a crow announce that there are 59 minutes until dawn. Tanjiro keeps continuing by using sun-breathing solar heat haze, beneficient radiance, clear blue sky, fire wheel, raging sun, and flame dance. Yelling at Tanjiro to stop jumping around, Muzan attempts to attack the young demon slayer again with renewed ferocity, but Tanjiro dodges his attacks with sun-breathing fake rainbow and follows that up with dance-setting sun transformation, burning bones, summer sun, dragon sun halo head dance, and sunflower thrust. With that, he successfully connected all 12 forms of the sun breathing, and with a new renewed hope, he determines to keep doing so until daybreak, even with greater speed and accuracy. Yushiro and some of the demon slayers make their way towards Chachumaru's mangled body, and the demon reattaches the cat's head to its body, cradling it in his arms as it recovers. The accompanying demon slayers are taken aback at this and ask Yushiro if Chachumaru is also a demon, and he replies in the affirmative, saying that he and Tamayo had turned it into a demon shortly before the battle. Yushiro snaps at the pair to stop dawdling and tend to the injured. They run off with vials of Tamayo's anti-Muzan serum and get to Inosuke, Kano, and Zenitsu. Walking over to Gyome, Yushiro assesses the damage on the Hashira and notes that he has lost a lot of blood in addition to his leg. Tying up the wound to stem the bleeding, Yushiro begins to worry as he declares that Gyome is in no position to fight even if he does regain consciousness in time, as the blood loss and lack of equilibrium will hinder him too much. Within over 50 minutes left till sunrise, he thinks of Tamayo and asks her to help Tanjiro in his battle with Muzan, saying there is no way the boy can last this long on his own. Meanwhile, Tanjiro continues to connect the different forms of the sun breathing to defeat Muzan. As he matches blows with the demon, his left sleeve is ripped off and he dodges back to avoid the attacks. Seeing that it is not enough to merely connect the forms, Tanjiro realizes he must accurately target all of Muzan's hearts and brains to effectively use the 13th form. However, just as he attempts to see through Muzan to be able to do so, he almost blacks out due to lack of oxygen. Shocked at this, Tanjiro quickly attempts to regain his bearings and sniff Muzan out instead, but slips and is almost hit in an attack from the demon before Obanai intervenes and scoops him out of harm's way. Quickly dodging all of Muzan's attacks, Obanai successfully carries Tanjiro out of danger, with the demon left angrily exclaiming at their constant resistance, asking why wouldn't they just die already. Tanjiro's vision clears up, and he is able to see his rescuer, and he is overjoyed to recognize the striped Haori of Obanai. This quickly transforms into horror though, as he sees that the serpent Hashira's face has been mutilated with slashes across his face and through his eyes. Mortified, Tanjiro asks Obanai if he was injured while saving him, but the Hashira hastily explains that it was during Muzan's attack from before, which had knocked out all of the Hashira. Continuing to dodge attacks from Muzan, Obanai tells Tanjiro to quit worrying about the others as the boy offers to help out and says the vision impairment will not affect him greatly, as one of his eyes has always been weak, and that he has a snake friend Kaburamaru. Confirming that Tanjiro has recovered, Obanai lets go of the boy and quickly engages in battle with Muzan, who had jumped towards them with great fury and tackles him one-on-one to Tanjiro's shock. With Kaburamaru's aid, Obanai dodges all of the demon's attacks as the surrounding building is destroyed, and Tanjiro rushes to use sun breathing again to help split Muzan's attention. Muzan notices that the snake is relaying information to Obanai, which is allowing the Hashira to dodge his attacks, and is infuriated that such a simple animal is able to read through his attacks. Tanjiro and Obanai match Muzan's attacks in tandem, and the demon is further annoyed at being unable to kill such seriously wounded humans, realizing that it is due to the aging potion. Continuing to evade Muzan's blows, Tanjiro sees that the demon has gradually gotten weaker, but is barely hanging on himself, trying his best to avoid oxygen deprivation. Resolving to help Obanai, who has helped him so much already, Tanjiro was shocked to see Muzan's body begin to change colour as old scars appear all over it. Realizing that these were the wounds Yoriichi gave Muzan so long ago, which the demon was never able to recover from, seeing that the demon had been burnt at the cellular level and that the wounds were his weak spots, Tanjiro says that Yoriichi was still showing them the way. Muzan Kibutsuji reminisces over when he first saw Yoriichi, recalling how he had first thought the swordsman to be weak as he exuded no drive or desire to fight Muzan or any hatred towards him. He had never expected Yoriichi would be able to cut off his head and wound him in such a way that his body, right down to the cells, would continue to hurt, as if being hit with sunlight. Continuing, Muzan says it was entirely out of the blue, and no one could have expected it, and that Yoriichi had been the real monster instead of him. Tanjiro rallies himself to take advantage of Muzan's growing exhaustion and newfound weak spots. Noticing that the scars were all moving across the demon's body, Tanjiro concludes that they all mark his heart and brains, and now even though he cannot see through Muzan anymore due to lack of oxygen, he can still locate his organs and target them. Trying to figure out a way to help Obanai overcome his visual impairment, Tanjiro decides to give the Hashira one of Yushira's seals, and suddenly a crow announces that there are 40 minutes left until dawn. Upon hearing this, Muzan immediately dashes away, leaving the battle, in an attempt to secure himself away from sunlight. Tanjiro quickly yells this out to Obanai, who remembers that Muzan is not like a human who would act on emotion, and that he would cling to his life first and foremost. Muzan begins to further the distance between himself and the Demon Slayers, much to Tanjiro's frustration, and suddenly passes through a crowd of Demon Slayer corpses, trampling on them in his way. This frustrates Tanjiro, who reaches the corpses and begins throwing all their swords straight at Muzan, who quickly slices through all of them, with great concern as piercing attacks would be far worse for him than slashes in his current state. The demon comes to an abrupt halt as Obanai drops from above and stabs him through the top of his chest, jumping away just before Muzan's whips can swipe at him. Tanjiro slices at the whips with sun breathing to ensure Obanai's safety, but has to throw away Yushira's seals while defending from Muzan's ferocious attacks. He yells at Obanai to jump to his right to grab them, but is relieved as Kaburamaru snatches them out of the air and Obanai takes them from him and wears one. Being able to see better than before, Obanai begins to more effectively attack Muzan, who begins to pant. Realizing that his strength will soon give way, Muzan becomes truly concerned, as far away, Nezuko reaches the outskirts of the town where the battle is going on, with one of her eyes having gone back to the way they were when she was human. Nezuko slowly makes her way, panting towards the town where the battle with Muzan is underway. Suddenly, she flashes back to her memory of Muzan's attacks on the Kamado family. After he had attacked all of the members of the family and seen that they had all apparently died due to his attacks, the demon notes that even with a small dose of his blood he had kept in his attacks, none of them had been able to become demons, saying that it would be difficult for him to make a demon who could withstand the sun. Muzan left the Kamado house, unaware that Nezuko had survived. More memories flood into Nezuko's mind as she sees the visions of the people and events she and her brother Tanjiro had encountered during their journey, including Giyu, Sakonji, Yushiro, Zenitsu, and Inosuke. She collapses to the ground, unable to keep walking, and more memories flash through her brain of the Hashira meeting and Tanemi attempting to lure her into attacking him for his blood, and finally her memory of Kagaya. She remembers the time at the Butterfly Mansion and meeting its residents, including Shinobu, who during her stay once offered to give her a closer look at the goldfish next to her. Nezuko thinks back to the adventures with Kyojuro, Tengen, and their time at the Swordsmith village. Finding her footing, Nezuko stands up, with her hand transforming back to a human hand as she gets up. With another memory of her brother's hand, as he told her that he would save her no matter what, Nezuko holds her head, sweating and grunting profusely as she turns back into a human, declaring that she is Nezuko Kamado, whose family was killed by a demon. Meanwhile, the battle with Muzan rages on as the demon rues the fact that he has still been unable to finish off Tanjiro. Sensing that the other Hashira are slowly reviving, Muzan curses the Demon Slayer core, saying that they are like linked beads of rosary which had always been there trying to end him. A crow announces that there are 35 minutes left until dawn, and upon hearing this, he attempts to split himself into several pieces, the way he had done in his fight with Yoriichi. Tanjiro recognizes this technique and realizes what Muzan is about to do, calling out to Obanai, telling him Muzan's plan, secretly worried that if the demon successfully managed to split himself, then they would be unable to stop him. However, Muzan finds that he is unable to do so and quickly realizes that this is yet another side effect of Tamayo's medicine. He is shocked yet again as he suddenly coughs up blood, and Tamayo tells him that there were 4 ingredients to the medicine, and that when the first 3 had weakened him, the 4th would take effect. The 4th being the destruction of Muzan's cells, with Tamayo saying in Muzan's head with an eerily menacing grin that the death he hated so much throughout his life was now terrifyingly near. The apparition of Tamayo inside Muzan's head tells him that there is no need for them to be stronger than him to kill him. She says that just as he would do anything to survive, then they who had suffered at his hands would do anything to kill him. Muzan notes that in regular circumstances he would not be concerned at the bright red blades of demon slayers, as they were all weaker than the bright red blade of Yoriichi, and the regeneration would not be so exhausting for him. He curses the medicine injected into him by Tamayo, as they now render him susceptible to such exhaustion and make the attacks of the demon slayers far more potent than they normally would be. Realizing the poison is different from the one used on Doma, Muzan notes that it will take some time for him to analyze the compound and counteract it. Suddenly, he freezes and stands still, looking at the sky. For a moment, Tanjiro believes that the demon has finally started to get exhausted and that Tamayo's medicine is finally taking effect. He and Obanai attempt to capitalize on this opportunity and attack Muzan, but a giant shockwave with lightning erupts out of the demon's body and strikes everything in close vicinity to Muzan. Huge jaws erupt from Muzan's torso and run along it diagonally to his back as he bares fangs and glares at the destruction he has caused, with Obanai left stunned and unable to move, and Tanjiro also experiencing seizures. Meanwhile, Kuraya Kanata and Kuwana also received damage from the attack due to the Kasugai Crow being instantly killed in the blast. Seeing this, Tengen and Shinjiro rush to their aid. Kuraya, bleeding from the nose, hastily says that he is fine and asks if Tanjiro and Obanai are doing alright. Shinjiro wonders if Muzan somehow sensed the location to be able to cause damage. Kuwanai announces that there are 25 minutes left until dawn, and Kuraya asks the Demon Slayers to hang in there, and that a final victory over Muzan is within their grasp. Tanjiro is still unable to get up and wonders if his lungs were damaged in the attack, seeing Muzan walk away in anguish. However, the demon stops in his tracks as Inosuke jumps in front of him, saying that Muzan had really done it now, and that he wouldn't stand for it any longer. Enraged, Muzan attacks Inosuke with Tanjiro calling out for him, but he is only able to weakly flail his whips about. Panting, Muzan realizes that he has become too tired after using the shockwave as Inosuke, huffing and wheezing himself, says that Gyume had lost his leg trying to protect them and that Giyu has lost his arm. Continuing, he tells the demon that he had taken the lives of the other demon slayers he had shared meals with, and Inosuke demands that he give them all their lives back, and tearfully says that if he couldn't, then he would pay for it with 1,000,000 deaths. Muzan launches an attack at Inosuke, who manages to jump right out of the way, but just as he lands, Muzan sends his right arm whips into the ground to catch Inosuke from below, managing to ensnare the Demon Slayer. Tanjiro attempts to get up and help his friend, but is unable to, and says that he will die first. Suddenly, Inosuke is saved by Zenitsu, who slices through Muzan's arm whip and says that Tanjiro is still alive, as he can hear his heartbeat. Yelling at Tanjiro to continue fighting and to stay alive, Zenitsu tries to bolster his spirits and tell him not to die so that Nezuko could become human again and they could go back to the house they used to live in. Muzan smacks Zenitsu into the building, but Inosuke quickly slices his whip to prevent any further damage. The demon is infuriated and attacks Inosuke as well, with Tanjiro desperate to help his friends through this fight. Deducing that it could be a blood demon art affecting his nervous system, Tanjiro attempts to undo it by stabbing himself in a non-vital area with his Nichiren sword. The blade sizzles as it enters his body, and Tanjiro prays that it stops the shaking enough for him to help out in the fight. A disheveled Muzan looks on as Zenitsu and Inosuke recover and note that he is unable to raise his arms anymore as both Giyu and Gyomei make their way to the battlefield to resume their fight with him, stopping at nothing to finally kill Muzan once and for all. Everyone prays for the success of those fighting Muzan as Inosuke and Zenitsu continue to attempt to hold the demon back. Inosuke performs his beast-breathing fourth fang slice and dice to chop off some of Muzan's whips as Zenitsu follows it up with a thunder-breathing first form, thunderclap and flash Godspeed. Zenitsu notes that he is losing his strength and he would only be able to muster one more attack with his full strength and unleashes a thunder-breathing seventh form Honokazuchi no Kami, but it only produces a shallow cut in Muzan. Seeing that only a bright red blade could deal sufficient damage to Muzan, Zenitsu falls to the ground and Muzan slashes at him. Inosuke intercepts this attack with his beast-breathing fifth fang Crazy Cutting, following it up with his third fang Devour, in rapid succession. Muzan is enraged and unleashes a weaker shockwave from the mouth on his torso that flings Inosuke back. Before Muzan is able to do anything else, however, Tanjiro intervenes and performs the sun-breathing Burning Bones Summer Sun and rapidly performing the Raging Sun Firewheel, Beneficent Radiance and Dragon Sun Halo Head Dance. Noting that Muzan needs to allow his shockwaves to charge before using them, Tanjiro attempts to use more of his sun-breathing technique, but coughs up blood before he can attack, and is bailed out from Muzan's counter-attack by Inosuke, who uses a beast-breathing sixth fang Palisade Bite, which allows Tanjiro to unleash the sun-breathing Dance Clear Blue Sky and Fake Rainbow. Zenitsu remembers his mentor, Jigoro, and asks him to give him the kick he needs, performing another thunder-breathing first form, Thunderclap and Flash. Zenitsu attacks Muzan, but is aggravated by the fact that he is too slow, as Inosuke and Tanjiro continue their combined onslaught on Muzan with their respective sun-breathing Dance and beast-breathing fifth fang Crazy Cutting. Inosuke gets knocked back, but Tanjiro is able to continue attacking Muzan with his sun-breathing Setting Sun Transformation and Dragon Sun Halo Head Dance, with some help from Zenitsu, who takes a blow intended for Tanjiro to allow his friend to continue attacking. Tanjiro manages to perform successive forms of the sun-breathing Dragon Sun Halo Head Dance and Raging Sun to pin Muzan to a wall. With the sun-breathing Sunflower Thrust, he is unable to perform more techniques as the mouth of Muzan's chest attempts to take his blade. Suddenly, Matsuri grabs Muzan's left arm and rips it clean off his body in anger, sacrificing her own arms in the process. Tsunemi appears and quickly chops off Muzan's right arms as well, with the wind-breathing 8th form Primary Gale Slash. Undaunted, Muzan opens wide his mouth from his torso to the top of his head and tries to eat Tanjiro with it. However, Obanai steps in and takes the bite instead, protecting Tanjiro as dawn begins to break. The sun begins to rise as Muzan Kibutsuji is horrified at the sight of it. He unleashes another shockwave and blows Obanai and Tsunemi away. However, Tanjiro holds on but loses his entire left arm. Resolving to keep holding Muzan down, Tanjiro attempts to tighten his grip on his sword and make it go bright red, but is unable to do so. Suddenly, Giyu Tomioka appears behind him and also grabs his blade to help keep Muzan pinned down. With both Demon Slayers holding onto the blade, with their combined might, it turns the blade red and Muzan instantly starts to cough up blood. As the sun rises steadily, the demon quickly attempts to think of a way to avoid disintegrating. Muzan attempts to cover himself in a wall of flesh to block the sunlight from hitting his skin and transforms into a giant baby. As the flesh grows outward and begins to swallow up Tanjiro, he throws his head back to headbutt Giyu out of the flesh's growth, and he gets swallowed into it alongside his blade as the Water Hashira yells out to him. Muzan attempts to crawl away from the scene into some shade, and Karaya Ubuyashiki orders the remaining members of the Demon Slayer Corps to do everything they could to hinder him. Some lower ranking Demon Slayers throw a bookcase on top of Muzan's head from a building, slowing him down, but he still crawls forward. A pair of Kikuchi ram into him with some cars, yelling at him to die as Karaya orders them to all fall back. Muzan crushes the cars and attempts to crawl forward. Finding his way blocked by some tram cars held by more Kikuchi, Muzan attempts to overcome this hurdle as well as he slowly begins to sizzle. As Muzan attempts to crush the Kikuchi behind the tram cars with his fist, Karaya orders them to fall back and stay alive. Tsunemi intervenes and slices off Muzan's right arm with wind-breathing 9th form Eta 10 Typhoon. However, the cut was too shallow to do any more damage. As Muzan continues to try and climb over the cars to avoid dying, Gyome throws his chain around the demon's neck, and with the help of some Kikuchi pulling on him, the Stone Hashira attempts to pull the demon down onto the ground with brute force. He successfully does so, and Karaya yells for the demon to finally burn and disintegrate as Kawana Ubuyashiki prays for their victory. Determined not to die, Muzan continues his resistance and begins to dig underground to avoid the sunlight. Giyu and Tsunemi work in tandem to attack the demon and strike him with water-breathing 10th form Constant Flux and wind-breathing 5th form Cold Mountain Wind. They are joined by Obanai, who unleashes the serpent-breathing 4th form Twin-Headed Reptile, but all three are only able to inflict minor damage. With everyone at their limit, Gyome's chain shatters, and Muzan begins to crawl deeper down, with the others left too exhausted to further impede him. Suddenly, Tanjiro tightens his grip on his blade and attacks Muzan from the inside, causing him to rear up in agony, going straight up into the sunlight, and the demon finally begins to disintegrate as he cries out. The sun rises on a new day as Muzan Kibutsuji finally disintegrates, and everyone heaves a sigh of relief, crying as their battle is finally over. Karaya Ubuyashiki orders for the injuries of the wounded to be tended to before passing out himself. Gyome refuses to accept any help from the junior demon slayers or Kikuchi, and asks for the injuries of the younger fighters to be tended to first, as he knows that his fate is inevitable. He begins to see all of the children he used to care for at the temple appear before him, and they tell him they had always wanted to apologize for the day they had been attacked by the demon, saying that they knew they had hurt him. They explain that they had not intended to run away, but were instead trying to protect him as he was the blind one. One child says that he was trying to go outside to get farming tools as a weapon, while another says she had been trying to go and call for help. Gyome hears their explanations and accepts them, as they continue on and tell him that they also had a reason for driving out Kaigaku that night, which they would have not told him about had they lived till the morning. Wistfully wishing the next day had dawned for the children as well, Gyome apologizes to them for being unable to protect them. The children tell him not to apologize, saying that they love him and that they had been waiting for him this entire time. Thanking them, Gyome says that they can all now move on together, and passes away with a smile on his face, leaving the Kikuchi in tears. Mitsuri comes to and finds herself in Obanai's arms and asks him if they had won. He tells her that they did, and she is relieved, but tells him that she could not feel anything more and that she would die soon. Obanai responds that he would also be dying soon and that she wouldn't be alone. Anguished at this, she tells him not to die, apologizing for not being of much use in the fights. Reporting though that that was not true, Obanai reminds her of the first time they met, when Mitsuri had gotten lost in the mansion, and she recalls that Obanai had helped her. Obanai rebuffs, saying that it was the other way around, and that she had been the one who saved him. He tells her that despite all of the troubles she had gone through to become a Hashira, she had still been so normal when they had met, and that she was still capable of enjoying the things around her like a regular human being. This had made Obanai feel like a regular boy as well, as he had cherished his time with her, saying that he was sure the other Hashira had felt the same way. He tells her that her cheerfulness had saved many people around her, and that she had not been useless at all. Mitsuri begins to cry and says that meals had tasted better with Obanai, as he had always looked at her with great affection. She asks him if she could be his bride if they are ever reborn, and Obanai replies that she could definitely be if she would have him as hers, and that he would make her happy and protect her. Meanwhile, Tsunemi sees a vision of Genya and his siblings all playing together happily in heaven, but looks around for his mother, who is nowhere to be seen. Turning behind to his right, he senses his mother, Shizu Shinazugawa, standing there, and pulls her hand from the darkness, telling her to join her children. However, she refuses, saying that she didn't deserve to go to heaven, as she had attacked her children. Smiling serenely, Sanemi tells her that he would go along with her, saying that Genya would be saddened to see him so soon. He attempts to go with her, but her hand is wrenched away by his father, who says that he would be the one accompanying their mother. Sanemi yells at his father to let go of his mother, but he simply responds that Sanemi isn't ready to die yet and that he was extra tough. Sanemi regains consciousness and the Kikuchi are overjoyed to see this. Inosuke regains consciousness as well and bites a Kikuchi who attempted to help him while coughing up blood. Zenitsu tells the Kikuchi tending to him to tell Nezuko that he loved her and was brave fighting to the very end, calling her his wife, as others point out that he's actually not married. Giyu gets up and tries to find Tanjiro, but looks forward to see the boy is kneeling, still holding his blade and having bled heavily after losing his arm. The Kikuchi tearfully informed Giyu that Tanjiro was no longer breathing and had no pulse. Giyu was greatly saddened, tearing up and kneeling down in front of Tanjiro. He grabs the boy's remaining hand and apologizes for having failed to protect him. He was always the one who ended up receiving protection. He apologizes to Nezuko for being unable to protect her brother, not knowing that she had arrived at this scene and was tearfully running for her brother from behind him. As death dwells, Muzan Kibutsuji recounts how death had always been close to him, and that his heart had stopped many times, even while he had been inside of his mother's womb. He had been stubborn, but when he was about to be cremated, he suddenly began writhing around and crying for the first time, and thus had been spared. The demon feels relieved as he says that he had finally achieved what he had been waiting to make happen for so long, admitting that what he could do on his own was limited. He thinks of Kagaya Ubuyashiki and concedes that what the master had told him was correct, saying that everything that lives must die, and their only feelings were external. Muzan says that he did not remember even a single human being he had killed, but their feelings had passed on and stayed alive, even managing to conquer him. Being moved to tears at the fact that the feelings of all the people had vanquished him, Muzan is resigned to his inevitable fate. However, he says that his own feelings are external and undying, just like anyone else's, and he extends his hand towards Tanjiro, who was there with him and still alive. As he gives all of his blood to Tanjiro, Muzan says that if the boy survived this, he would become the strongest demon ever, since he was the brother of Nezuko Kamado, the first demon to develop an immunity to sunlight, and also the one capable of using the breath style of Yoriichi Tsukiguni. As he slowly disintegrates, Muzan tells Tanjiro to make his dream come true and destroy the Demon Slayer core in his place. As Giyu Tomioka kneels in front of Tanjiro and the surrounding Kikuchi shed tears, one of them suddenly gapes in shock as the tumor from Tanjiro's head disappears and he opens his eyes to reveal a demonic gaze. To everyone's shock, Tanjiro regenerates his left arm and swipes at the Kikuchi next to him, but Giyu reacts quickly and pushes the Kikuchi out of harm's way. The other Kikuchi look on in fear and ask why Tanjiro is acting in such a manner. The boy stands, drooling profusely, enjoying his newfound fangs and claws. His Demon Slayer mark mutates and grows down to move past the bridge of his nose, with another identical mark growing upwards from the bottom of his neck, almost to meet in the middle, similar to Kokoshibo's mark. Giyu rushes forward and yells at the other Kikuchi to get away from Tanjiro as the boy looks to swipe at him. Suddenly, the sun shines brightly from the sky, and Tanjiro double takes to look at it. He begins to burn and writhe on the ground, with his swipe at the Kikuchi going off target, but still managing to rip off the lower half of his mask. As Giyu gets in front of the Kikuchi, he tells him to run away as he prepares to face this new threat, yelling for everyone who is still conscious to grab weapons and begin fighting. Everyone else looks on from afar with confusion at the sudden commotion, unaware of Tanjiro's fate, when Giyu suddenly announces to them that Tanjiro has become a demon. He says that they need to pin Tanjiro down and burn him in the sun before he could kill anyone. Tanjiro suddenly attempts to find shade to stop burning, but Giyu intercepts him by stabbing him from the side and dragging him into the ground, with the boy clutching at his hair, noting to himself that if he had not been interrupted by the sun, Tanjiro would have surely killed the Kikuchi. Giyu wistfully begs in his mind for Tanjiro to stay who he was and die as a human. Suddenly, Tanjiro stops burning and Giyu looks on in shock as the boy takes advantage of the Hashira's surprise to swipe at him. Giyu narrowly dodges, but his chin is grazed and Tanjiro follows up with another swipe that is intercepted by Inosuke, who yells at his friend and asks him what he is doing. Giyu attempts to stand up, but feels dizzy from his blood loss and cannot do so. Inosuke stands over him and tries to remind Tanjiro that Giyu is their ally, as Zenitsu also approaches the scene, supported by a Kikuchi. Tanjiro crouches down and a third Demon Slayer mark appears from the other right side of the head, and he bears fangs at Inosuke, who can only look on quietly at what has become of his best friend. Zenitsu looks on in disbelief at the scene and says that everyone else is tired and unable to continue fighting, asking for Tanjiro to think of Nezuko. Tanjiro leaps forward to attack Inosuke, who prepares to fight him. Inosuke thinks back to his time together with Tanjiro and says that they are all comrades, like brothers who would pull each other back if one of them started going down the wrong path. Stealing himself by thinking that no matter how difficult it was, they would always walk down the right path, Zenitsu yells at Tanjiro to stop, as Inosuke thinks to himself that he would strike Tanjiro down and stop him himself. Suddenly, hit by a memory of Tanjiro offering him some fish to eat together with a smile on his face, Inosuke stops mid-swipe at Tanjiro's neck and is unable to complete his attack, tearing up and saying that it was no use and that he could not attack Tanjiro. Giyu, Inosuke, and Zenitsu look on in shock as Nezuko runs forward and hugs the now demonified Tanjiro. As he sinks his claws and fangs into his sister, she begins to bleed out, but Tanjiro does not proceed to drink her blood. Crying, Nezuko hugs Tanjiro and apologizes to him for all the hardships he had to endure to make her human again. She encourages him to resist becoming a demon and says that going through all of the suffering was quite difficult, but to never give up. As Nezuko tells him to come with her, Tanjiro starts sinking his claws in deeper and lets out a wild howl. Inosuke and Zenitsu rush forward to help Nezuko to try and bring their friend back. Zenitsu grabs Tanjiro from behind and begs him to stop hurting Nezuko and that she had become human again. As he tells him that she might die if he continued further, Tanjiro lets out another howl, but this time is interrupted by Inosuke repeatedly hitting him on the head, saying that Tanjiro was not the kind of person who would hurt his sister. Inosuke tells his friend to snap out of it and to go back to being his kind, usual self. Angered, Tanjiro lets out another feral howl and sends a shockwave that flings Inosuke, Zenitsu, and Giyu back as Nezuko desperately clings onto her brother. She falls to the ground as Tanjiro gets on all fours and releases bone whips similar to those of Muzan's from his back. She begs him to keep fighting his newfound demonic tendencies, however, he still swings a whip towards Zenitsu. Giyu intercepts the attack by performing the water-breathing fourth form Striking Tide, saving Zenitsu and the Kikuchi propping him up. Thinking to himself that things had progressed too far, with Tanjiro having bitten into Nezuko and learning the taste of blood, Giyu aims to kill Tanjiro. However, the Water Hashira acknowledges that neither bright red blades nor the sun will work on Tanjiro anymore, leaving him virtually indestructible. Suddenly, Tanjiro charges a ball of pure energy from his mouth. Nezuko sees this and desperately tries to stop her brother from committing any murders, telling him that he has to stop. Nezuko puts her hand in front of Tanjiro's mouth to block the attack and it goes off course, hitting the ground instead. Giyu was able to dodge as Zenitsu calls out to Nezuko in concern. Her entire left hand and forearm begin to bleed profusely as a result of blocking the attack, and she yells at her brother to stop as he gets on all fours. Attempting to stop him from using his whips, Nezuko puts her hand on her brother's back and Tanjiro is only able to strike the ground again. Looking on in shock, understanding begins to dawn on Giyu as he sees that somewhere inside, Tanjiro was fighting his demonic urges as he was avoiding doing any lethal damage to Nezuko. Giyu decides to try and bring Tanjiro back to his senses, though he is unsure he would be able to perform such a miraculous feat. Meanwhile, from behind the shade of a nearby building, Yoshiro looks on at the scene, cursing Muzan for continuing to torment people even after his death. Seeing that his blood demon art would disintegrate with sunlight, Yoshiro feels powerless to stop the carnage. Suddenly, he sees Kano limping forward to the scene of the battle. Looking on at the sight of the two siblings, Kano tears up and feels sorry for them. She reaches for the vial of medicine in her front pocket and is relieved to find it undamaged. Thinking back to when she received it from Shinobu, Kano remembers the former insect Hashira telling her that she had made an extra vial of Tamayo's medicine in the fear that there might not be enough left for Nezuko once things had settled. She tells Shinobu that this must be the reason why she has still got one eye. Quickly analysing Tanjiro, Kano assesses that since he had only just become a demon, she would be able to dodge his attacks even with just one eye. Kano activates the flower-breathing final form, Equinential Vermilion Eye, and charges towards Tanjiro, with Giyu doing a double take and recognising the move as Kane's. Tanjiro swipes at Kano, but she evades it by backflipping over the boy and injects the medicine into him, just as he redirects his arm and then slashes at her torso. As she begins to bleed, Kano tells Tanjiro that it is enough and it is time for him to come back to them, saying that he must not make Nezuko cry. Kano falls to the ground with a thud as something begins to stir inside Tanjiro's consciousness upon hearing Nezuko's name, and the medicine begins to take effect. Nezuko tearfully calls out to her brother to return so that they may finally return home. Tanjiro stirs in his subconscious and responds that he is very tired and wishes to go home as well. Tanjiro prays to the god to return home, saying he only wants to go home with his little sister. But as he raises his arm to reach forward, eyes grow on the flesh growths that cover his body and begin to speak. The voice of Muzan attempts to dissuade Tanjiro from returning to his loved ones, asking what would happen after he returned to them. Muzan tells him that his entire family is dead and that there is no point in returning home, but Tanjiro responds that he still has memories of the happy days there. He tells the Demon Lord that their memories will never disappear as long as he and Nezuko are still alive, and that is why he has to go back. Tanjiro continues to slowly reach forward. As Muzan tries harder to dissuade Tanjiro, he lies to him and says that the boy has killed Nezuko. Unpersuaded, Tanjiro calls Muzan's bluff and says that Nezuko is alive, telling him he lies. His deceased friends then all give him a push to the back to raise him up. Muzan tells them not to interfere and continues to try and mislead Tanjiro, saying that they all now hate him and don't want him to return for what he has done after becoming a demon. Muzan continues to try and discourage the young demon slayer, but Tanjiro responds that he wants to apologize to everyone for hurting them, and Muzan retorts saying that they would not forgive him, then telling the demon slayer that it was not for him to decide. But Tanjiro perseveres and continues to move forward, saying that he could smell all of his friends being concerned for him. Growing more frustrated, Muzan tells Tanjiro to be silent and says that he is the inheritor of his will, so he should not look forward or try to find any hope, but instead should embrace life as a demon. Telling the boy that he would die in a few short years because he had manifested the Demon Slayer mark, Muzan urges him to think only of himself and live forever. However, the boy refuses and says that he never wanted to live forever, and that he only wanted to return to his friends and live as a human. Adamantly refusing to give up on trying to mislead Tanjiro, Muzan tries to manipulate him further and asks if the boy really wishes to return to a life after everyone else has died. Grabbing the head of Tanjiro in his hands, he asks Tanjiro if he wants to live on without losing anything. More hands push Tanjiro forward and he smells the scent of wisteria flowers. At first, believing it is Shinobu Kocho, he tears up as he sees Nezuko's arms reaching out for him, reaching forward himself to meet her. Tanjiro grabs Nezuko's hand and she attempts to pull him forward, but Muzan grabs his arm and tries to force him away, saying that they had finally conquered the sun and that Tanjiro would go with him, saying that he was a rare being. Muzan tells him to hear the cries of the dead and that they all resented him for being the only one who could move on and keep his life. Rebuffing this, Tanjiro says that they were not such people, and that instead, they had been willing to sacrifice their lives for others, saying that while they were sad and suffered, they did not wish that for others. As Tanjiro begins to be taken away, Muzan grabs at his torso and tries to pull him back, but in vain, as the hands of Giyu, Zenitsu, and Inosuke join Nezuko to pull him up. As even more hands reach out to pull Tanjiro up, Muzan finally loses his grip and Tanjiro regains consciousness to find Nezuko looking down at him with tears in her eyes, with his friends and the Kikuchi surrounding him. Nezuko calls out Tanjiro's name and he apologizes to everyone for having brought them harm. Everyone begins to cheer upon hearing his voice, and Inosuke tells Tanjiro that he hadn't caused them any significant harm at all. Zenitsu begins sobbing and says that he would make Tanjiro pay for his entire life for what he had done to him, and calls Nezuko his wife, much to her shock and consternation. Giyu heaves a sigh of relief and a Kikuchi holds him to keep him stable. As Nezuko hugs her brother, they both smile through their tears, and a Kikuchi wakes Kano up to tell her the good news. Kano regains consciousness and smiles as she looks on at Tanjiro, with Tanjiro thinking to himself that he was glad that she was still alive. Inosuke grabs Tanjiro's head and begins to sob as Yushiro pulls out Tamayo's hairpin and begins to weep, saying that it was all finally over. 3 months after the battle against Muzan, the world is now free of evil demons and the survivors of the battle continue living despite all they lost. Tanjiro recovers at the Butterfly Mansion and sees the cherry blossoms in bloom alongside Nezuko. Inosuke and Zenitsu sleep peacefully at the other end of Tanjiro's bed as Nezuko says that the flowers look very pretty. Examining Tanjiro's left hand, now horribly shriveled, Nezuko asks her brother how it feels, and he responds that he cannot feel anything on his left arm beneath his elbow, so he cannot use the hand anymore. Then he points to his right eye and says that while it looks okay, he cannot see anything out of it. Tanjiro asks Nezuko how she is doing, and she responds with a beaming smile that she feels perfectly fine. Still feeling guilty though over having attacked her when he was a demon, Tanjiro apologizes to Nezuko for attacking her. Nezuko pouts and says that no one cares if he turned into a demon and attacked everyone, saying that she was just glad he was human again. She tells him that if he apologizes for it again, she would flick him on his forehead. He tells her that Giyu told him he feared all was lost when Tanjiro had bit Nezuko, and she laughs, saying she had felt the same way. Then he tells her that Yushiro had told him that it was quite lucky actually, because they had Shinobu Kochu's medicine with them, and because Nezuko had already been a demon before, she had also developed an immunity to Muzan's cells. These words fly over Nezuko's head as Tanjiro reiterates what Yushiro had told him. The demon had told Tanjiro that had they not Shinobu's medicine, or had Nezuko not been the one that he had bitten, then he may have never become human again. Yushiro had been impressed that Tanjiro hadn't completely lost himself, since he had been more powerful than either Muzan or Nezuko, even conquering his son in an instant. He told Tanjiro that he admired him for having fought valiantly, and the boy had stammered over his words at the compliments, modestly saying that he had received a lot of help. Yushiro had told him that it was a joke and not to take it seriously before picking up Chachimaru and leaving. Tanjiro had called out to him before he left though, asking him to stay alive and to not die, as he was the only one who could keep Tamayo's memory alive. Tanjiro had not heard from the demon since then and was getting slightly worried about him. Suddenly remembering Giyu, he asks Nezuko where he is, and she responds that he is alright and was with Karaya Ubuyashiki. Meanwhile, Karaya began the final Hashira meeting, with the two remaining Hashira, Giyu Tomioka and Tsunemi Shinazugawa, both in attendance. Karaya announces that the Demon Slayer Corps was disbanding from that moment on. The Ubuyashikis express their gratitude to the Hashira and the Demon Slayers for their centuries of service and bow before them, with both Hashira protesting this, telling the Ubuyashikis that they were the one that kept the Corps together, and that they did not want any thanks. The Hashira instead expressed their gratitude towards the Ubuyashikis. Giyu tells Karaya that he was excellent at his job, and that his father and ancestors would be proud, and the Ubuyashiki tears up at these words. As Karaya thanks Giyu for his compliment, the two Hashira look on at each other and smile, as their long journey had finally ended. Meanwhile, Tengen Uzui and his 3 wives visit Tanjiro, being glad to meet them again. Suma rushes forward to greet Nezuko and starts loudly doting over the girl, so much that Makio hits her for being too loud, much to her frustration. She asks Tengen if he saw Makio hit her, but he responds that he missed it. Tengen tells Tanjiro to visit them when he got better, giving them their address, and Hinatsuru handed him a snack. Shinjiro speaks with Tanjiro and thanks him for using Kyojoro's handguard on his blade during the final battle, saying it would have made his son quite happy. Tanjiro humbly replies that Kyojoro's words had been quite inspiring for him, and that they had helped him throughout his journey. Zenitsu suddenly wakes up and finds that the swordsmiths are waiting outside of Tanjiro's room, saying that they come every day and creep him out. His shock only grows as a group of Kikuchi also arrive and they all enter the room, filling it to the brim. Zenitsu holds on to Tanjiro. Oh my god, man. Zenitsu holds on to Tanjiro, scared at the turn of events as Tanjiro smiles at the sight of more of his comrades. Meanwhile, Inosuke sneaks away into the kitchen and grabs a snack as Aoi is busy cooking. He swipes some of the food and she catches him, saying he was stealing again, and then offered him a plate of prepared food, telling him to stop stealing food. Inosuke is quite impressed at how quickly she caught him and wonders if she's strong, and then smiles serenely as he begins to dig into the food presented to him. Kano stands in the garden in front of a cherry blossom tree, and Tanjiro comes to meet her, saying it was a beautiful tree. She tells him that it was called Victory and had been planted by the first user of the flower breathing, and she had come to tell it that they had finally defeated Muzan. Tanjiro asks her how she is doing, and she responds that she still has some vision left in her eyes and that her wound was better, saying that even Tsunemi had given her Obanai's pet snake Kaburamaru to take care of as the serpent slithers out of her collar. Tsunemi meets Nezuko and she greets him, asking him how his injuries were, to which he responds that they are fine. Tsunemi apologizes to Nezuko for having passed out after Muzan's defeat, leaving them to deal with Tanjiro on their own, but she cheerfully responded that it was no trouble, and that she had once passed out for 2 whole years, saying that it was nothing compared to that. She then says that she loved sleeping, which makes Sanemi think of Genya Shinazugawa when he was a child, and when he had told Sanemi that he loved sleeping because he didn't get hungry. Sanemi smiles and pats Nezuko's head, telling her to take care, as Zenitsu jealously looked on from around the corner of the hallway and raged at Sanemi's actions. Tanjiro and Nezuko find Giyu and Sakonji and greet them, glad to finally be reunited. Later on, they go and pay their respects at the graves of all of the fallen before they depart the Butterfly Mansion for the Kamado residence. Zenitsu complains that it will take all day, but refuses to let Inosuke do it with his faster method, saying he would not pay proper respect. Once they were finished and on their way to the Kamado household, Inosuke asks Zenitsu what he was carrying on his back, as Zenitsu responded that it was his Gramps' remains. Puzzled, Inosuke asks what remains are and if they are edible to Zenitsu's disgust. On their way back, they meet Saburo, one of the people who had lived near the Kamado family, and he greets them tearfully. When they had arrived back at the Kamado household, they find flowers are growing outside the house, and they pay their respects to the other Kamados by kneeling in front of the flowers and praying. They begin their new life at the Kamado household, and time leaps forward to a large, modern city. Well, that officially brings us to the very end of the Sunrise Countdown arc and the entire Demon Slayer series in general explained. If you guys have enjoyed this video and my series as well, like entirely, then make sure you do hit that subscribe button, as honestly, I've had unrealistic growth over the last few weeks, and I can't thank you all for the amount of support that I have been getting. Like, honestly, the Demon Slayer series, I'm probably going to give it like a strong, solid, like 7 out of 10. I know when it comes to the author and a lot of like home stuff that was going on, and she had to kind of like speed up the ending there, and I tried to like kind of purvey that in like my video also as well, but like trying to give that kind of like rush sense to it, because I did feel when I read it, it kind of had like that rushed sense to it, like the whole thing slowly sped up further and further as it got throughout the story, and then learning later on obviously that the author had some, you know, like personal issues, and that's kind of why she actually sped the story up. Kind of makes sense now, so I hope I was able to convey that in a good enough way. It has taken me like 6 videos, or like 5 videos, I'm not too sure, I've lost count, since the beginning of the series to cover up to here. And if you guys want me to go over obviously the start of the Demon Slayer series before like the stuff that I've done here, obviously, then do let me know down below and I'll do that, and then I'll compile it into a massive video that'll be like too long. It'll just be too long. Obviously, if you guys are interested in other series as well, then do be sure to chuck a comment down there and let me know what you guys want to see. I am going to be going over Attack on Titan next and the final season, so obviously if you're interested in that, then be sure to be on the lookout for that. I thought I'd add this in here. I also decided not to add, you know, obviously chapter 205, which is the very final chapter of the entire series, because if you guys are interested, go and read it yourself. It's an amazing chapter which kind of just shows the future of the entire world with like the lineage. I think it's only like 1 or 2 generations ahead, and I think Karaya is like the Oyukata that broke like the oldest living person in the world. Quite cool scene, you know, like descendants of them being all together and the stuff that they said would happen in the past kind of happen in the future. I like that kind of stuff, and it brings, you know, like butterflies to my stomach, or however you want to put it. So I enjoyed it at the end of the day, and that's all I'm looking for in a series. But yeah, for now it's been your professional degenerate Diavolo, and I will see you all in a bit. Bye.